You look in the mirror and see a human. But what are you, really? What if I told you that hidden in your DNA, there are ghosts?
We were taught that Homo sapiens won the evolutionary race alone, that we were the sole survivors. Modern biology disagrees. We didn't annihilate the other species. We merged with them.
The most famous image of human evolution is a biological fraud. You know it, the March of Progress. It starts with a hunched ape on the left and ends with a modern, upright, and triumphant man on the right. This image planted in our subconscious the idea that evolution is a linear process of substitution. The weakest dies, the strongest advances. But the truth is that evolution is not a straight line. It is a chaotic tree, full of dead branches, grafts, and bizarre crossbreeds. Around 50 to 100,000 years ago, planet Earth looked like something out of a fantasy epic. If you walked across the continents, you wouldn't just find humans like us. You would find a world populated by multiple species of intelligent, self-aware, and highly adapted humans.
There were the Neanderthals, dominating the unforgiving cold of Europe. The Denisovans, hidden in the high mountains and vastness of Asia. Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits, living isolated on an island in Indonesia, and other species whose fossils we haven't even discovered yet. Our ancestor, Homo sapiens, was just one among other species walking the vastness of our planet. So, what happened to all of them? How did we become the last ones to turn off the light? The answer isn't just war, climate, or competition.
The answer is flowing through your veins right now. We absorbed them.
When our Homo sapiens ancestors left Africa, they didn't enter uninhabited continents. They invaded Neanderthal territory, the Middle East, and Europe. For decades, scientists fiercely debated what happened during these encounters. Did they fight? Did they ignore each other? The definitive answer only came in 2010, later solidified by the 2022 Nobel Prize in Medicine awarded to Svante Pääbo. Pääbo achieved the seemingly impossible, sequencing a Neanderthal genome from ancient bones. When crossing this genome with the DNA of people alive today, the scientific community went into shock.
If your ancestry is not 100% sub-Saharan, about 1 to 2% of your genome belongs to a species dead for 40,000 years. Yes, you have Neanderthal DNA. This means that, during the glacial nights of ancient Eurasia, sapiens and Neanderthals mated, and they didn't do it just once. It was a recurring phenomenon. But this heritage isn't just a museum curiosity. It affects your body today. The Neanderthal DNA that survived in us was not random. It was rigorously selected by evolution. We inherited genes responsible for keratin production, helping our skin and hair resist the European cold, for which we were unprepared. We inherited HLA complex genes, essential for our immune system to detect new viruses and bacteria that Neanderthals had already known for hundreds of thousands of years. But there is a dark price. Recent studies show that certain Neanderthal gene variants are linked to a higher risk of depression, blood clotting issues, severe allergies, and, more recently discovered, a frightening susceptibility to severe respiratory complications in contemporary viral infections, such as COVID-19, according to 2020 studies by Zaberg and Pääbo.
If the story stopped at the Neanderthals alone, it would already be revolutionary. But it goes much further. In 2008, archaeologists explored the Denisova cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. They found a tiny piece of a pinky finger bone from a young girl and some bizarrely large teeth. They assumed it belonged to a modern human or a Neanderthal. But when the DNA was extracted and sequenced, it was neither. It was an entirely new human species, unknown to science. We call them Denisovans. This was the first time in the history of anthropology that a new species was identified exclusively through DNA,
without a skull or a complete skeleton to prove its existence.
Were they giants? Were they solitary hunters? Physically, we know very little. But their genetic ghost is loud.
Just as we did with Neanderthals, we also mated with Denisovans. If you go to Asia today, you will find traces of Denisovans. But if you go to Oceania, to places like Papua New Guinea, you will discover that Australian Aboriginals and Melanesians carry 4% to 6% Denisovan DNA. It is the highest percentage of archaic DNA in any modern population. And there is an even more spectacular case: the Tibetans. Surviving high in the Himalayas is biologically extreme. The air is so thin that a normal human would suffer hypoxia, their blood would thicken, and their heart would fail. How have Tibetans survived there for thousands of years? The answer is the EPAS1 gene. This gene alters hemoglobin production, allowing for super efficient oxygen use. The craziest part? Homo sapiens did not invent the EPAS1 gene. Sequencing proved that we stole it. It is a Denisovan gene. The ancestors of the Tibetans mated with Denisovans, absorbed their genetics for extreme altitude adaptation, and kept climbing the mountains.
For a long time, a false consensus was formed. Europeans have Neanderthals, Asians have Denisovans, and Africans are the only pure humans. Once again, science shook its head. The cradle of humanity is also the world's largest genetic melting pot. In 2020, a monumental study by UCLA, University of California, led by Arun Durvasula and Sriram Sankaraman, analyzed the genome of modern West African populations, such as the Yoruba and the Mendi. They weren't looking for Neanderthals. They used artificial intelligence and statistical models to look for puzzle pieces that didn't fit into sapiens biology.
What they discovered shook modern biology. West African populations carry between 2% to 19% DNA from a ghost species, an archaic hominin species that split from our evolutionary line before the Neanderthals, and at some point around 43,000 years ago, interbred with Homo sapiens again within Africa. We don't have a single fossil of them. We have no tools. We don't know what their faces looked like. They live only as code inside our genome, ghost species whispering in the genetic data of modern populations.
All of this leads us to a fundamental question. Why did we interbreed so much with other species? The psychological answer might involve loneliness, reproductive instinct, or cooperation. But the evolutionary answer is mathematical and brutal: survival. Evolution through natural mutation is extremely slow. If a group of tropical sapiens marched into the freezing European winter, they would have to wait tens of thousands of years for random mutations to give them thicker skin, a cold-adjusted metabolism, and resistance to local pathogens.
The problem is that winter doesn't wait thousands of years. Neanderthals had already been in Europe for 300,000 years. They had already paid the price of adaptation. By mating with them, Homo sapiens didn't have to wait for the slow clock of mutation. We did a genetic download of thousands of years of local biological adaptation in a single generation. It was the greatest evolutionary hack in history. We swapped genes and stole the keys to global survival.
The human ego is fragile. We spent centuries building walls between ourselves and the rest of the animal kingdom. We created taxonomies that placed us at the top of an untouchable pyramid. The idea that we were the only survivors made us feel special. But the reality unearthed by DNA sequencing machines is cold and objective. We are not a pure species. We are not the last leaf on a solitary branch. We are a river that flowed through history, absorbing other currents along the way. Every time we look in the mirror, we are not seeing the solitary winner of evolution. We are seeing a biological monument, a living mosaic built by the survivors, by the Neanderthals of the ice caves,
by the Denisovans of the high mountains, and by the forgotten ghosts of the savannas. What made Homo sapiens the only human species to triumph is not racial purity. It is our infinite capacity to mix. Because we are a mixture that absorbed a little bit of each of them, we were capable of the adaptation needed to march toward evolution. If you seek answers not found in traditional history books, subscribe. The Evolution of Ancestral Life in 2 weekly videos.